The U.S. Constitution bars anyone who is engaged in insurrection from holding office. As outlined in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, this provision states, "No person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or any state, who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof." So why is Donald Trump being allowed to return to the presidency? And should the Constitution have prevented him from even running again? Congress can prevent Trump from taking office, but they need to take action right away. An insurrectionist who violates the Constitution is not allowed to serve as president, but as we know, the Republican Party has become Trump's cult, and the likelihood of them standing up to him is non-existent. Section 3 of the Constitution's 14th Amendment is stated in this straightforward manner. This disqualification can only be lifted by a two-thirds vote in both houses of Congress. Crucially, the prohibition applies to insurrection against the Constitution, not just the government. Evidence overwhelmingly indicates that Donald Trump engaged in such insurrection, as established in 3 separate proceedings. Firstly, Trump's second impeachment trial. On the 13th of January 2021, Donald Trump was impeached by the House for incitement of insurrection. During the Senate trial, 7 Republicans joined Democrats in voting for conviction, but the total fell short of the two-thirds majority required. Inciting insurrection aligns with the constitutional criteria for disqualification, engaging in insurrection or giving aid and comfort to the Constitution's enemies. Number 2 is the Colorado judicial proceedings, which in a 5-day hearing, a Colorado court concluded by clear and convincing evidence that Trump had engaged in insurrection under Section 3. While the U.S. Supreme Court later ruled that states lack the authority to disqualify federal candidates and that federal legislation is required to enforce Section 3, the court did not dispute the finding that Trump engaged in insurrection. And finally, number 3 is the January 6 committee's finding. The bipartisan House Select Committee investigating the January 6 Capitol attack presented damning evidence, including testimony from Trump administration officials and Republican witnesses. The committee found that Trump attempted to coerce Vice President Mike Pence into overturning Electoral College votes, a demand Pence was constitutionally powerless to fulfill. When Pence refused, Trump incited the rioters further, leading to chants of "Hang Mike Pence." Of course, we all watched the insurrection play out on live television, and incidentally, so did Donald Trump. Some people argue that the Supreme Court's decision in Trump versus Anderson precludes Congress from rejecting Electoral College votes based on 14th Amendment disqualification. However, this argument is flawed for 3 reasons. Firstly, dicta in the decision. The majority suggestion that new federal legislation is needed to enforce Section 3 is dicta, meaning non-binding commentary not essential to the decision. Such musings lack precedential value and are not binding on Congress. Secondly, congressional authority. The Constitution explicitly assigns Congress the authority to count Electoral College votes. This task is a political question beyond the Supreme Court's purview. And finally, existing legislation. You see, the Electoral Count Act, first enacted in 1887 and updated in 2022, provides mechanisms to resolve disputes over Electoral College votes. It allows objections based on votes not being regularly given, which includes votes cast for constitutionally disqualified candidates. To challenge a candidate's disqualification, 20% of members in each House of Congress must sign a petition. If both chambers agree by majority vote, the contested votes are excluded, reducing the number of votes required for election. If all Trump's votes were disqualified, Kamala Harris would become president. While it's highly unlikely that congressional Republicans would support a measure resulting in Harris's presidency, Democrats have a duty to oppose Electoral College votes cast for a constitutionally disqualified candidate. Upholding the Constitution requires them to act decisively in defense of its provisions. The Constitution does not spell out how to enforce the ban, and it's been applied only twice since the 1800s when it was used against former Confederates. Donald Trump ridiculed the lawsuit at his campaign rallies. His lawyers and advisors have argued that it would be un-American to deprive voters the opportunity to decide whether the former president should return to the White House by removing him from the ballot. While the groups behind the lawsuits are liberal-leaning, many of the plaintiffs are actually Republicans. The lead plaintiff in Colorado is Norma Anderson, a Republican former state legislator who served as majority leader in both the Colorado House and Senate. A growing number of constitutional scholars have endorsed the challenger's theory against Trump, including some notable conservative jurists and legal experts. Trump's immunity protections, created by his hand-picked Supreme Court, seems to have circumnavigated the law on insurrection and indeed any criminal activity, including convictions that Trump might be attached to. This is further proof of the lawlessness baked into the patriarchy, the power of rich white men in America who, time and time again, appear to operate above the law, despite their crimes being widely documented and supported with evidence. It seems there is no desire or willingness by anybody to really go forward with this notion of disqualifying Donald Trump. Arguably, it should have been done a day or two after the insurrection on January 6th, with his entire scheme being exposed, including the fake electors scheme, which was planned months in advance. There is little doubt in anybody's mind as to what went on, but the mechanisms in place to deal with it, considering that Donald Trump has presented himself as a populist as well as a victim of a shooting and political witch hunts, makes holding him to account all the more impossible. I doubt any individual, let alone political movement, will have the strength to stand up to this rise of authoritarianism that has taken over the Republican Party. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.